Rachel, the Student Witch, and welcome to a new, long-awaited episode of Witching Through Grad School. Well, at least it was long-awaited by me. Sorry it's been a while since I contributed to that series, but I'm trying to amp it back up. I know a while ago I promised a new episode on perfectionism, but then since I've been working on my prospectus, on my kind of proposal for my dissertation, I found myself in the throes of perfectionism, and so I figured I should try to work on that and get to the other side of that before I present a video on it, right? But that is coming in October. That is coming, along with a video about some witchy, pagan-y things you can do if you are applying for grant and fellowship money, which is what I'm going to be doing this fall and probably next year too. So those videos are coming for this series. Also, a spell candle video will be coming once this spell candle is used up. I'm going to start another one, so I'll talk about that. So, Witching Through Grad School is back, and I'm so excited to finally have some really exciting ideas for that. For those of you who are signed up for my newsletter through my website, which is linked below, be on the lookout for a newsletter this weekend, the weekend of September 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, because that is the equinox. I'll be talking about upcoming content as usual, talking about the equinox and what that means for the northern and the southern hemisphere, and then I'll offer or share with you guys a quick little tarot or oracle spread, whichever you prefer, about balance, because equinox equal day and night, balance. For those of us in the northern hemisphere, we're entering into the dark half of the year, balancing the dark with the light, and for those of you in the southern hemisphere, you're entering the lighter half of the year. So I'm really excited for that, so be on the lookout for that. Just quick little updates, I guess. I went to a wedding this past weekend. My best friend got married, and I was one of the bridesmaids. And so she had a lady come in and do everyone's makeup, like professional makeup, including airbrush foundation or something. I don't really know how that works, but I had fake eyelashes for the first time. And I had so much makeup on my face. I think I posted about this a few days ago or even over a week ago about how I went 4 years without wearing any makeup. Like, nada. Maybe a little bit of tinted lip gloss every once in a while, but that was it. And I did it for a variety of reasons, but this past summer we had a friend getting married in June, and so I figured, you know what, I want to try this minimalism makeup thing, this minimalist style of makeup. So I went out and got some very basic things, like 5 things, like that's it, that's all I own. A blush stick thing, which can actually double as blush and actually triple as blush. You can use it on your eyes, you can even use it as a lipstick. I got a little bit of concealer, mascara, and like 2 lipsticks, and that's it. That's all I own. But just seeing my face just covered, just plastered in this like very event-oriented makeup, not everyday makeup, but like wedding makeup, it was like, and then on top of that, having the fake eyelashes on, I just looked like a different person. Maybe on my Instagram I'll post a picture, a selfie I took at the reception where I was like, But man, I'm still finding like chunks of the black eyeliner that the lady used, because she put this black eyeliner on and then she, on top of that, you know, put the glued fake eyelashes on, and I'm still like waking up with little chunks of it on my face. It's ridiculous. I mean, that wedding was Saturday, it's now Thursday. But anyway, I went to a wonderful wedding. My best friend got married. I'm so happy for her. But now I'm ready to get back into this series and get back to work. My prospectus is going well. I'm working through the literature review section. Well, actually it's called State of the Art and Your Contributions. So you have to talk about what's already been said about your topic and then how you're going to contribute to that conversation. And then there's the methodology, and then there's the theory section, and then the fourth section is your table of contents, and then little descriptions, like 1 or 2 paragraph descriptions of what you plan to do in your chapters for your dissertation. And I hope to have all of this done by October 1st, because I need to have all of this passed. I need to be ABD, all but dissertation. I need to be ABD status by the end of October. That's the deadline that my department gave me. So I'm busy, but I'm here. I had an extra hour this Thursday morning. You won't see this video until this weekend, but I have an extra hour this Thursday morning to sit down and talk about what it's like being in the witchy or spiritual closet as an academic. I'm drinking some wonderful tea. It's the ginger turmeric herbal tea from Trader Joe's. If you're looking to increase your turmeric exposure in your life, I highly recommend this tea. And the ginger is great too. Let me set that down. So I wanted to start this conversation by mentioning and maybe reading a little bit, like 1 or 2 sentences from a book that was written by an academic who is out of the witchy spiritual closet. Not really witchy, but this is Pedagogies of Crossing. What's the full title? Pedagogies of Crossing, Meditations on Feminism, Sexual Politics, Memory, and the Sacred. It's a beautiful cover. See the faces in the ocean and then the egg. By Jacqui Alexander. And I'm mentioning this book because this is one of the first, not the only, but one of the first academic books, meaning peer-reviewed, meant for an academic audience kind of books, that openly talks about spiritual practice, and not Christian spiritual practice. The author, Jacqui Alexander, is a priest in voodoo, like Haitian voodoo, and Santeria. She is a practitioner, and she talks about that in this book, which is fucking amazing. And the title of the book refers to, she calls the classroom a sacred space for decolonizing ourselves and kind of liberating ourselves from the systems of power and oppression that were put into place as a result of colonialism. And she's talking mostly about New World colonialism, so the Americas, but she also mentions other colonial events and histories from other parts of the world, right? So Pedagogies, the classroom is a sacred space, and actually, I'm going to make note of this. I should make a video as in this series talking about that, because I have experienced kind of very liberating and powerful moments in the classroom, both as the teacher but also as the teaching assistant for my advisor in her class. And so, yeah, the classroom can be thought of as a sacred space. So I'm going to hold that off and put that aside. But that's what the Pedagogies is talking about. But it's also talking about the Atlantic slave trade and the Middle Passage. She says, Pedagogies, the book, and this is from the introduction, summons subordinated knowledges that are produced in the context of the practices of marginalization in order that we might destabilize existing practices of knowing and thus cross the fictive boundaries of exclusion and marginalization. So this book is aimed at highlighting, exploring, discovering new ways of knowledge production, like outside of the traditional academic European, Western, colonial epistemologies, new ways of producing knowledge that focus more on the body and on movement of the body and on altered states and spirit possession. Like, it's really amazing stuff. And it's really amazing that this was published for an academic audience. Then she goes on to say, this then is the existential message of the crossing. Keeping in mind the crossing refers to the Middle Passage and the lives that were lost in the Middle Passage. She says, let me skip around, I'm going to be skipping around a little bit, but on the previous page she says, I am simultaneously concerned with the power of the disembodied and the stories that those who forcibly undertook the Middle Passage are still yearning to tell 5 centuries later. So it's really interesting that she talks about those lives that were lost as a result of the slave trade, even if, you know, they lived and died 400 or 500 years ago, they're still yearning to tell their stories. My AC just kicked in. She uses the present tense, which is really fascinating if you think about in different Afro-diasporic and Afro-Caribbean religions, how the practice of spirit possession, like being mounted by a spirit in ritual, is a form of time traveling, because that spirit from the past is now in the present making predictions about the future. And that's actually very relative to my own dissertation and how I'm going to approach time and history, keeping in mind that my dissertation is about apocalypse and queer utopianism and blah 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 blah. I'll make a blog post about it eventually in very general terms. But anyway, so these voices of the disembodied, of the lives lost even hundreds of years ago, are still yearning to tell their stories. And it's from those stories that we get those pedagogical lessons, right? They are the teachers. So this then, skipping back to the next page, this then is the existential message of the crossing, to apprehend how it might instruct us in the urgent task of configuring new ways of being and knowing, and to plot different metaphysics that are needed to move away from the living alterity premised in difference to living intersubjectivity premised in relationality and solidarity. So yeah, if you are interested in Afro-diasporic religions and spiritual practices, but you're open to reading a book from an academic perspective, not that this is a study, like an anthropological study of those practices, but this is a book written by a practitioner talking about sexuality and sexual politics and fighting against colonialism and that kind of stuff, and using their spiritual practice as a way to produce new knowledges and confront colonialism and its legacy. This is the book for you. But I specifically picked up this book because she talks about the spiritual closet and academics in the spiritual closet. So she says, drawing on my own, and this is later in the introduction, page 15, drawing on my own position of priest in 2 African-based spiritual communities of Voodoo and Santeria, of mixed gender and sexualities, I trace the ways in which knowledge comes to be embodied and made manifest through flesh, an embodiment of spirit. Okay, so embodied spirit, spirit possession, right? So she talks about how spirit, the concept of spirit, has been paid very little attention, in the ways in which spiritual labor and spiritual knowing is primarily a project of self-knowing and transformation that constantly invokes community simply because it requires it. So she talks about spiritual labor, spiritual practices, as projects of self-knowing. And she says later, many, I suspect, and she's talking about mostly academics here, many, I suspect, have been forced into the spiritual closet. end quote. Like, she literally talks about the spiritual closet and how she's coming out of the spiritual closet with this book. And so the rest of the book consists of different essays that she has written over the years and compiled into this book. It's so liberating and powerful and revolutionary. I really, really suggest this book. But the fact that an academic is talking about coming out of the spiritual closet and talking openly about her position as a priest in Santeria and Voodoo, and the power of spiritual practices in self-knowing and self-liberation from systemic oppression and from perpetuating systemic oppression, this is what sparked my interest in making this video, because I am a spiritual practitioner. I have a spiritual practice. I'm not a practitioner of Voodoo or Santeria. I'm not interested in that kind of cultural appropriation. But I am a chaos witch pantheist, and I have a daily morning ritual, and my spiritual practice informs my research, because my spiritual practice is geared at self-knowing and self-liberation, and how that self-liberation can help me to better, to be a better academic and teacher, and to contribute to different social and political movements that are geared towards liberation of all peoples, geared towards tearing down systemic oppression like white supremacy and sexism and homophobia and xenophobia, so that we can all claim a right to happiness and peace in this life, right? That's how I use my academic work, and my academic work is fed by and informed by my spiritual practice. So I think this topic is really important to address, because I know I'm not alone. I am fortunate enough to be in the humanities, and I say this because from what I've seen from grad students and academics in other fields tend to be a little bit more conservative, like socially and politically conservative. For example, my partner, he finished his PhD. Oh, he is Dr. Partner. He has a PhD in education, specifically mathematics education. So he studies like the psychology behind learning different mathematical concepts like proportionality, rates, ratios, things like that. So they study the psychology of learning, but they also study the psychology of the classroom, and how classroom setup, student engagement, group work versus individual work, and even the students and the teachers' socioeconomic background or race background or racial identity or sexual identity, and even gender, well, especially gender, comes into play in affecting students' learning and the teachers' effectiveness in teaching different mathematical concepts. It's a really interesting field. But there was a professor in his department who was a creationist, who doubted evolution. So this man had a PhD, but he was a creationist, because the field of education in general is a little bit more conservative than my field of like Latin American literature, where we have all these like revolutionary pro-communist queer people in my field, and it's fucking amazing. But I have to recognize that in a way, in this discussion, I'm a little bit privileged compared to people in the hard sciences or in the math departments or more conservative fields, political science. Even some history departments can tend to be a little conservative in how they approach history and stuff. So if you find yourself in one of those more conservative fields, this topic might touch even more close to home for you than it does to me. So, as far as my experience about being in the spiritual witchy closet as an academic, I'm extremely fortunate that my advisor is very open. She believes in energy, she uses crystals, she burns Palo Santo, and she there's been so many times I've walked down the hallways of these big austere academic buildings and I've smelt the scent of Palo Santo wafting down the hallway as I approach her office, and she has a little goddess statue and a candle to Guadalupe in her office, so she has a little mini altar in her office. So I can be a little bit more of myself when I'm talking with her in private, because I know to a certain extent she gets it, but she's the only one. Well, that's a lie, because there are some colleagues of mine, some other grad students, they're in different departments from me, but I know for sure one of them, I think, practices Santeria, is a practitioner. Like, he has flowers constantly on an altar and he'll post pictures of it on Facebook, and he is using Santeria in his research. So I'm really fortunate to be surrounded, oops, sorry, I hit the camera. I'm really fortunate to be surrounded by these people. However, outside of that little group of us, I do have to be very careful, because unfortunately when you get to these upper echelons or whatever of academia, the assumption is, depending on the department and the environment of that department, you're either a Christian, like in the field of education, or maybe it's more acceptable to be a practicing Christian or Muslim or whatever, like one of the Abrahamic religions, the dominant Abrahamic religions, or you're an atheist, like especially in my field, in the humanities and literature and stuff. The assumption is you're an atheist. However, of course, there are Christians, there are Jews, there are Muslims, practicing Muslims, and Christians and Jews, but for the most part, most people are at most agnostic or atheist, or at least that's the assumption. That's like the base level of what you assume about somebody. So having an altar or talking more openly about your spirituality, particularly witchcraft. I think witchcraft is seen, and I was even guilty of this before I came to witchcraft myself. A superficial misunderstanding about witchcraft is that it's just so irrational, right? And for those of you in the hard sciences or in fields that are kind of guided by an idea of rationality, it might even be harder for you, or I can guarantee you it might be harder for you to talk openly about being a practicing witch, because people automatically think like, oh, you think you light a candle and you can magically make money appear or something like that. It's like a misunderstanding of kind of the deep philosophical questions that and spiritual questions that come up through practicing witchcraft, being a practitioner of magic in any way, shape, or form, and understanding that you have a right to exercise your power and you can affect change in your environment. I mean, that's very much my definition of magic, is affecting change in your environment and practicing your power. Right? That's my working definition. Don't quote me on that. Not 100% sure of that, but it's a way to see it. And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of rolling eyes that come from the general public about witchcraft and even other practices that kind of fall under that huge, gigantic, complex pagan umbrella, right? And that would even include things like the Afro-diasporic traditions, hoodoo, voodoo, voodoo, santeria, all of it, right? Candomblé in Brazil, that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting how this doubt and this, what's the word I'm looking for? Skepticism that is thrown at witchcraft and these Afro-diasporic traditions, or any kind of like non-rational or non-Christian specifically religions, like all of these skepticisms and fears and misunderstandings and rolling eyes are thrown at these kind of practices, and how it's interesting because that just perpetuates, in my mind, because I kind of see everything through the lens of colonialism, it perpetuates the privileging of European and Western ways of producing knowledge and knowing, while denigrating and just colonizing other ways of being and knowing and doing and practicing power and connecting with spirit, whatever that spirit might mean to you, right? I mean, the European colonizers went off into the world and colonized other parts of the world, and what did they do? They talked about how irrational or driven by superstition the people were that they encountered, right? Thus establishing themselves as the compass or as the standard of rationality and philosophy and knowing, right? And that was really bad in the 19th century with the rise of social Darwinism and eugenics and all sorts of gross shit. And it's really interesting, this privileging of rationality over whatever might be deemed irrational. Yeah, it just perpetuates colonialism. But anyway, I could talk about that all day because I'm writing about that right now, so it's on my mind. But it's really great to find the scholars who are pushing against that, who are pointing out the colonialism behind our modern concepts of mathematics, the hard sciences. I mean, you have to understand math and science and the different fields of knowledge, and even how academia is set up as a product of colonialism. Like, why do we have European-style institutions in non-European spaces? And how come those institutions are privileged as, like, the epitome of knowledge, when other spaces and other ways of knowing are seen as folkloric or irrational or superstitious or backward, right? So it's a problem inherent within the structure of academia itself, but there are those pushing against it. And you don't have to come out of the spiritual closet to push against it and point out the coloniality of academia, right? You can continue your spiritual practice, you can stay in the closet, right? But just you consciously making that practice real in your everyday life and doing those rituals is a way of rebellion, is a way of liberation from those Eurocentric paradigms, right? So I am still very much in the closet, apart from those few friends and my academic advisor and stuff. I still keep things very hush-hush. No one in my family or in my social circles, both inside and outside of academia, know about me as the student witch. And speaking of that, if you find that you you can't, in your social circles, in your everyday life, connect with people and talk openly about your spirituality. Being part of the online community is a great outlet for that need to socialize, that need to feel part of a community. Now, all discussions about the problems with community aside, I mean, it's no mistake that I started this YouTube channel around the same time, or a little less than a year after I started my current PhD program. I needed it. I needed an outlet. I needed to express myself. I couldn't keep this just hidden. My soul just felt like I needed to contribute to conversations. I needed to listen. I needed to share. I needed to talk to people. And so the online space provided me with that. It provided me a place to take up space and be that part of myself. Right? Now you have to be very careful when you're doing this, because unfortunately academia, like anywhere else, it can be a dog-eat-dog kind of world, and reputation is important. And so if someone outs you, it could affect your career prospects, especially if you are in those more conservative fields like hard sciences, math, some history departments. I mean, each department and each university is unique, but in general, education, economy, schools of business, school of law, the hard sciences, even some social science and history departments tend to be a little bit more conservative. And so if someone outs you, or someone accidentally comes across your Witchy Facebook page or your pagany Instagram, it could be a problem. Although to a certain extent, what else can you do? You just gotta own it at that point, right? Maybe claim religious freedom or something, and try to get them from ruining your reputation, which is sick, twisted, and fucked up, that like just being yourself and practicing your spirituality could ruin your reputation, but that's the world we live in, unfortunately. So do not feel guilty about being in the closet. If you have to be in the closet to protect yourself and your future, don't feel guilty at all. And actually, in some circumstances, being able to freely be out of the closet is a privilege, because there are a lot of people whose families would disown them if they came out of the closet. There are a lot of people whose careers would be jeopardized if they came out of the closet. So for me, my ultimate career goals is to stay in academia and be a tenured professor and write books and all that, and maybe probably when I'm in my 40s, if I get tenure, then I'll say fuck it and come out of the closet. But until then, I'm going to have to stay in the closet and be very vigilant. So the whole point of this is just be vigilant if you do turn toward the online space for community. Always have pseudonyms for if you start a YouTube channel, for example, or a Facebook page or an Instagram. Use a pseudonym. Make sure there's no overlap between your personal Facebook page or your personal Instagram or whatever that has your legal name, the name that people in academia know you by, and your witchy personality and pseudonym. Just be careful, and actually I don't want to come across as paranoid, but it is very important, because academics are just people, and they are subject to shitty behaviors and trying to ruin other people's reputation if they think that that will give them a leg up. It's competitive. Academia, like anything else, is competitive, and under pressure and competition, sometimes the shadowy, dark sides of people comes out, right? So just be careful, practice caution, use common sense, But also, if you feel that need for community, go for it. Search for it. And you don't need to start a YouTube channel. You can just create a YouTube account and interact with people like me who talk about being a witch in academia, for example, or there are more of us. There are more witches and pagans in academia. I know it because people have commented on my videos talking about their own experiences of being in grad school and being a practicing pagan. There are people out there to connect with, believe me. And it's so nice to connect with them because it helps you feel not quite so alone. Because it can be a very solitary or lonely experience if no one in your social circle, if you don't feel comfortable coming out of the closet with anybody that you know in your social circles or in your family or anything like that. So I think I've rambled for long enough. And this has been really rambly, but I wanted to get this out there just so that people don't feel quite so alone, because that was the hardest part for me when I first started identifying as a witch or a pagan or a pantheist or a chaos witch or whatever. I had so many ideas and so many exciting experiences that I just wanted to share and talk to people, but I had to keep a lid on it to a certain extent. So it's difficult. I mean, this is part of a larger conversation of the witchy pagan closet, right? But the experience can be very particular when you are a graduate student or even a professor or a master's student in academia, because academia has its own environment and baggage to deal with, right? So if you are an academic or a PhD or a master's student in the closet, or a college student even, how do you deal with it? I'm really interested to see if there are different avenues to take, things that I didn't mention in all of my rambles. Are there certain authors within academia that you connect with because they critique the Eurocentric models of academia, and they talk about spirituality and they talk about having a spiritual practice? Who are they? Because I would really love to learn more about people in different fields who are talking about it and openly being spiritual or openly being witchy or pagan or whatever. It would be great to find more authors, basically, writing from that, insider perspective. So who do you read? Who do you turn to? Who has been an inspiration for you? Or are you one of the lucky ones and you found actually like a pagan group of grad students at your university, or pagan organizations, student organizations, or community? How do you deal with the witchy or spiritual closet as someone inside academia in some way, shape, or form? I'm really, really fascinated about that because it's a struggle. It can be tough. So yeah, the next episode I think will be, I keep pointing the wrong way, that spell candle that I use for getting motivated to write and to believe in the validity of my research. So I'll make a video about that once it's time to make a new candle. And then I'll talk about perfectionism sometime in October. So be on the lookout for that for this series. And yeah, write your comments and thoughts below. And until next time, many blessings and happy writing and researching.